This is a near extinction level event, and we are in the middle of it right now. And almost nobody knows, almost nobody is talking about it. And in fact, there are very strong efforts to keep it that way.
Welcome everybody. In this video, I'm going to do a rebuttal to the sun weatherman Ben Davidson's interview on the Matt Beall Podcast. And the reason I'm doing this rebuttal is not because I think that I necessarily have the right answer, but because Ben Davidson makes several claims that are unsubstantiated, and it's important for us to look at them and understand where they come from, why he thinks they're valid, and what some of the arguments against them might be. At the top of the list is for me to note, listen, Ben's a brilliant guy. I have followed his work since about 2013. When he launched the mobile observatory, I donated $50 to the mobile observatory. My name's on the side of it, on its plaque. I have followed and had followed the sun weather, his sun weather report daily for quite a long time. And I believe sincerely that he is one of the pioneers of sun weather itself. And it's not only that he's the father of sun weather, of sun news, of the space weather, if you will, but his work on defining earthquakes and what causes earthquakes, in particular, being able to predict earthquakes is really one of the most important findings in the last 100 years. I mean, if you think about how many people have died from earthquakes, the damage that it's done, being able to predict an earthquake is no small thing. And that we aren't listening to Ben and to his work on that subject, as well as his work on space weather, is just insane. He is one of the leading thought providers in that space. Now, having said that, there are some things about his work that, are unsubstantiated, but worth considering. One of which is the idea of a solar micronova. I don't know whether or not the sun can generate a solar micronova or not. I don't know that that's necessarily something that I have to be concerned about, because as a catastrophist, I can have my own theories and my own thoughts on what might bring about the next event. But one of the things that Ben points to quite clearly is the moving poles of the Earth, the North Pole and the South Pole that are moving. And Ben says, hey, these are moving towards the Indian Ocean. And the truth is that, yeah, they're moving in the direction of the Indian Ocean. But if you follow the actual trail, the big line going right down the middle that they show, what you're going to find is it's headed right for the near impact site in the Tarim Basin. And so I don't know if we're headed for a pole flip. And I don't think Ben knows if we're headed for a pole flip. But what he's pointing to the fact that the poles seem to be heading for this one spot on the Earth, which did have a catastrophic impact in antiquity. And that's what I think is really important, is that when you look at the idea of catastrophism, the field of catastrophism, Ben poses himself as a catastrophist, which is fine. Anyone can study this subject. But Ben doesn't have a grounding on what causes catastrophe. And because of that, he hasn't identified a crater. He hasn't identified a discharge crater. I mean, the only thing he's identified in the interview is that there are several locations around the world that have magnetic excursions. And he points to lake after lake after lake. You have and of course, the Lechamp excursion being the primary one. If we look just at the chart of the Lechamp excursion, what we have to note is that the Earth's magnetic field dropped to 10%. And that's absolutely true. But what the chart of the excursion is showing is not the dropping of the magnetosphere, of the magnetic field, over 1,000 years as proposed. The Lechamp excursion is showing a snapshot of the electromagnetic pulse that occurred when the discharge occurred that ionized Venus, inverted the planet, caused it to spin backwards, and left it in a synchronous orbit with the Earth. If all of these things weren't true about Venus, and if the split in the surface of the Earth wasn't so obvious, then Ben might be able to say that there was some other cause for these things. All of the excursions, all of these formations, if they're a lake in particular, these all occurred in the apocalypse event. So there was just one event where Ben claims that there have been multiple. Now, were there multiple prior to this? One of the things to understand about catastrophism and why Ben is mislaid in his belief that the sun has a regular solar micronova is that all of the religion, all of the mythology says that there was a first sun, that there was a proto-sun, and that proto-sun was Saturn. Saturn was the first sun. It's been called a variety of things, including the turquoise sun, the black sun. What it's really doing is it's identifying a pre-creation world. And in that pre-creation world, humans weren't in their current state. We weren't walking around with the same sense of reality that people are today. They lived in what's called a dreamtime.
Prehistory was a dream turned nightmare. Mankind forgot the dream because it was too remote, and the nightmare because it was too shocking. The prehistory that we have confabulated, however, is too bland to be believed.
The Egyptians called it a dream time. The Aboriginals of Australia called it the dream time. Several cultures around the world say that before creation, we lived in a dream time, in a dream state. We should take that quite literally. And because of that, when we say that there were previous cataclysms or apocalypse to the big one, what we're really talking about is we're talking about the density of the earth increasing over time. And that density seems to have created these extinction level events. But none of these extinction level events were the type of extinction level event we experienced in the Venus apocalypse. And that's because during all the previous extinction events, all of the planets were along a single filament north-south. And that filament collapsed over time like a ball, like two balls bouncing back and forth north and south of the Earth. North of the Earth was Venus, south of the Earth was Mars. Venus, Earth, and Mars. These represented the three Gorgon sisters of Greek mythology. And in Greek mythology, Venus is Medusa, Gorgo, and Medusa is raped by Poseidon. The positive charge overwhelmed her, and Venus fell into the earth. This is the nature, this is the splitting point, the dividing line for creation itself. That creation prior to the event, that is the reality prior to the event, can be considered the novel time of humans living with the gods, that we lived in harmony and in peace. And that's because it was just a proto-world. We lived in a world where we were creating the reality that would be. The Venus apocalypse, then, is a dividing line for the creation of time going forward. And if you want to know when the apocalypse happened, my best estimate is somewhere around 700 to 2500 BC. Somewhere in that time frame was the actual apocalypse itself. And if we take time to do the math and backdate the synchronous orbits of Earth and Mars, we can come to a very good estimate of what the actual apocalypse date was. But the truth is that the Jews, the Jewish holidays, the Jewish calendar, the Chinese calendar, all of these calendars give us a date of around 3,000 years ago. 3,000, I think one is 3,100. These aren't just, somebody who woke up one day and decided that they were going to start counting years, like the dream stele found in front of the Sphinx, which says that it was created in year 1 of March, in the first spring. When it says year 1 on the dream stele, it means the very first year of creation. It means the first year. We should take this literally. And instead, Ben has this thesis that there were apocalypses 6,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, 18,000 years ago. He points to one being 41,000 years ago. First of all, there was no time prior to the apocalypse. all of the things that we see in the crust are a simulation of what we expect to find. It wasn't actually experienced. It was proposed, if you will. Anytime you say that something happened 6,000, 12,000, or 18,000 years ago, you have to have some sort of evidence for that. And there is no evidence that any of those dates or times really existed. And the reason I say that in particular is that people like to use carbon dating in order to say that some of these things happened. There's a really important experiment, and now it's actually commercial, known as the Sapphire Project. And the Sapphire Project is headed, one of the lead scientists is Hal Puthoff. And most people paying attention today know who Hal Puthoff is. Hal Puthoff is part of the Sapphire Project, and the Sapphire Project has created a miniature sun. And one of the ways that they did that is by utilizing an electric model for the sun, and that electric model for the sun degrades plutonium at a substantially accelerated rate. That is, things that are exposed to an electrical field will decay at an exponential rate. And so we're back to the point I made earlier about all of these excursions, including the Lechamp excursion. This chart of the Lechamp excursion, this isn't a chart of things happening over 10,000 years. This is a snapshot in time of the magnetic field of the Earth at the time the EMP discharged and cooked the entire crust of the planet. In fact, I'm almost certain that the reason the Egyptians mummified was to amplify the extraction of liquid from the crust of the Earth, in much the same way that the holiday of Hanukkah says that pigs were slaughtered in the temple, in the first temple. We were the pigs, and the first temple was the Proto-Earth. There was no Hellenistic man who brought pigs into a temple and slaughtered it. The temple was the earth. The slaughter was us. And the resurrection of the temple, the second temple, was the establishment of the new earth. And that's what we're really looking at when we look at the whole question of creation. And if you want to do your own research on how important it is to understand this creation story, you can always recognize the creation story because it begins with, and the earth was quiet. And that's because at the end of the apocalypse discharge, the electrical charge of the earth had been equalized between Earth and Venus. There was no weather, there was no wind, it was silent. And that's what's recorded in the religions and in the mythology. Now, from there, did we experience another cataclysm? Did we experience the Utnapishtim flood? You know, one of the things that I'm still working on is whether or not there was a second one where water became equalized on the planet. And it's right now my sense that there was a second event of a flood. But that flood, just like the story of Moses in the desert, those occurred at the same time. And so what we're wondering and we're looking at is the creation of humankind and our consciousness. Because the story of creation is the story of humanity and our second sun, which is the current yellow sun. Ra is a god of the apocalypse. And the connection of our planet to the sun and the moon is what the creation stories are really telling us and is all about. So when we look at the interview of Ben Davidson and Ben's assessment of catastrophism, one of the things that Ben could have done is he could have identified any one of a number of catastrophists in the field and asked whether their work and their ideas were valid and whether or not any of them are pointing in the same direction. He could have pointed to Graham, or he could have pointed to who's the other gentleman? Doesn't matter. He could have pointed to a whole lot of people. He could have pointed to Andrew Hall. Ben is presented at the Thunderbolts project conferences back in the early 2017, 2016, 20. He presented at the Electric Universe conferences, and from those conferences came Thornhill's theories, and came the theories of, well, frankly, Andrew Hall. And what he should have done is he should have stopped and he should have said, there are things we can say about catastrophism that have, excellent scientific basis. And one of those is Andy Hall's Keystone theory. And you can look at his video on the cracks in the theory that talk about electric layering of the Earth around the world. But he didn't. He pointed to catastrophes 6,000, 12,000, 18,000, 28,000, 41,000 years. One, how do you even come up with these dates? And two, and this is the most important part, he's just quoting the Adam and Eve story as told by Chan Thomas. Chan was just identifying that there was an apocalypse, but Chan didn't identify correctly much more than that. He says, look, mountains were thrust 24,000 feet into the air. Yeah, apocalypse. One apocalypse, not multiple. So what's my evaluation of the interview? Matt's a really great guy. Ben is a really great guy. The interview was very interesting. But if you want to understand catastrophism, if you want to understand the nature of creation, there was one apocalypse. There was likely one cataclysm that followed, which was the flood. And prior to that, it was just a dream. It was just a world of probability forming around what would be the reality after creation. Catastrophism is about understanding why religions say things like the first year, why it says things like Medusa was raped by Poseidon. It's things like, why do the Native Americans believe the Thunderbird was huge? It was because it spanned the entire east coast of North America. The world of catastrophism has great people for Matt and several other podcasts to interview. You've got Sean McPherson of the FractalEarth, whose work on the crustal expansion is second to none. You have the work of Andrew Hall, whose work on the electrical effects on the Earth, especially on the west coast of North America, are second to none. And whether or not you recognize the crater across the Eurasian Plateau, of which the Himalayan mountain chain is the edge of the rim, whether you recognize that or not, the fact of the matter is, you will, because that's how discovery works. And discoveries like that, my discovery of the apocalypse, is going to first be ignored, and then it will be fought, and then it will be self-evident. And if you've ever played golf, if you've ever seen a ball divot into the green, it's not hard to see the apocalypse crater of the Himalayan mountain chain. And once you understand that, once you understand the electrical nature of that, then Ben, who is definitely bright enough to get this, will understand the electrical circuit that then formed across the Earth in order to manage and store the charge. I'm not making up the electrical circuits. They're obvious and they're embedded in the circuit of the Earth. How else do you think things like the Polynesian Triangle were formed? How do you think the arc of the Indonesian peninsula was formed? And Ben points to that. He points to the Indonesian earthquake. Yes, I've talked about this in several videos. The Indonesian earthquake is about the plate of the apocalypse Indonesian bulb discharging as it releases the energy at the winter solstice. How do we know the apocalypse occurred? Because the electrical circuit is still there. It's still in effect, and it's still discharging. So, to any of the podcasts out there, if you'd like to send them an email and say, look, there is a guy out there who's got a real bead on what catastrophism is, who's identified the apocalypse, who has a theory on all of the mythology and all of the legends, and has recorded all of it in several dozens of videos. His name is Dr. Stinky McDougal, and I'm more than happy to visit any podcaster in America and present my work, because although I'm certain this is the deepest and darkest secret within the channels of the military-industrial complex, the fact of the matter is, I am the only person in the field of catastrophism who has identified the crater, the circuit, the mythology, and the religion. And so, one day, there will be a podcast, and that podcast will give me a chance, and it will begin the process of unfolding this for the entire population of the world. Because that's how important the discovery of the apocalypse is. It confirms all of the religions. It confirms all of the mythology. It confirms that what we should do is take what they say at face value. I'm not making up dates. I'm not telling you something happened 6,000, 12,000, 8,000. I'm telling you there was one event about 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, and it left a giant crater and a synchronous orbit with Mars and the Earth. If you want to interview the world's leading mythologist, I'd be happy to come out and explain what the apocalypse is as a contrast to Ben. Not because I think Ben is wrong, but because I don't think Ben is taking the time to acknowledge the data. He is a student of the electric universe. He is a student of electrical forcing. He is a student of the sun's impact on the Earth. But the sun didn't exist until the apocalypse itself. And so Ben's thesis is incomplete and incorrect. And I'd like to debate him on that if he would ever take the opportunity. But until someone actually decides that catastrophism is important enough to have that kind of coverage, I'm just going to keep on keeping on and looking for a date. Don't forget to click that like, share, and subscribe button. Peace out, everyone.
Do you think one of the podcasts will give you a chance?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I hope somebody will call. Maybe. Could be.